Hi, everyone. We'll just give everyone about 30 seconds so we can get some quorum before we begin. All right. Good afternoon from Nairobi, everyone, and welcome to this media briefing during which we will launch the UN Environment Programme's latest report, Turning Off the Tap, How the World Can End Plastic Pollution and Create a Circular Economy. My name is Keisha Rukikaire, and I will be your moderator during this session. I'm the head of news and media for UNEP. So in this solutions-focused report, UNEP and our partners provide a deep analysis of the concrete practices, the market shifts, and the policies that can inform government thinking and business action as the world seeks to effectively address the menace of plastic pollution and create a circular economy. Before we get into the substance of our press conference, I would like to go over a few housekeeping guidelines. The program should be 45 minutes long, and we hope to use at least half that time for questions from the media. We will start with brief remarks from UNEP's Executive Director, Ms. Inge Anderson, followed immediately by a presentation of the main findings of the report by Ms. Sheila Agarwal-Khan, who is the Director of UNEP's Industry and Economy Division, before we go straight into the media Q&A. Do bear with us if we encounter any technical challenges. We will do our best to address these so we can continue the program without interruption. So we also have on hand to answer questions the report from the media. Should the need arise, Mr. Stephen Stone, who is the Deputy Director of UNEP's Industry and Economy Division, Mr. Yorans Mila-Canals, who heads the Secretariat of the Life Cycle Initiative at UNEP, and Ms. Alison Cairns, who heads the Private Sector Unit in UNEP's Corporate Services Division. For media with questions, you'll see a Q&A box on the bottom panel of the Zoom screen. Please submit your questions in writing in this box. And in fact, you can start to send them now, as many of you will already have received the materials under embargo. Please ensure you specify your name and the media house you represent when you ask a question. The session is being recorded and live streamed. Both recording and live stream can be accessed on our website, unep.org, as can all the materials pertaining to this report. Our contact information, my contact information, is available on the press release and on our website. If you have requests for interviews, please do get in touch. So without further ado, I will give the floor to UNEP's Executive Director, Ms. Inge Anderson, for her remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon to members of the press. I sit before a photo of Benjamin Wong's beautiful art sculpture that he created at the time of UNEA 5, the UNEA that decided to embark on negotiations towards a plastic agreement. Now, the way societies produce, use, and dispose of plastic is polluting our ecosystems, creating risks for human health, and destabilizing our climate. And we know that people in the poorest nations and communities are those that suffer the most, as is the case in all the elements of the triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. This miracle material, which it is, it has in fact become a disastrous material insofar as the way we use it and dispose of it. There is hope in the global deal to end plastic pollution, which is under negotiation, and which we are due to land by 2024. This report, which is part of our Spotlight series, with this report, we are launching today the Turning Off the Tap. It's coming out just ahead of the next round of talks, and it's intended to inform negotiators, put some facts on the table, tell us what the science says. And so what does the report tell us? Well, first, that there are stark negative negative costs, economic costs of plastic pollution, running in the hundreds of billions annually, destroying infrastructure, impacting energy production and tourism revenue, and clogging our drains and flooding our cities, and potentially impacting human health through exposure to hazardous chemicals. Second, the report tells us that the starting point for change is to eliminate unnecessary and problematic plastics. 3 shifts are then required. 1, accelerating the market for reusable products. 2, accelerating the recycling market. And 3, reorienting and diversifying the market for sustainable and safe plastic alternative and packaging alternatives. And the third point of the report is that we need to take a full life cycle approach to plastics. One, by which I mean rethinking every stage from the design of production and systems to plastic production, through use, through recovery and disposal. The redesign of packaging and systems and products is crucial. Chemical engineers and manufacturers have to get creative, both on the product and on the packaging, instead of defaulting to plastics when designing products. And finally, we need to ensure the safe disposal of whatever is not designed to be circular and to deal with the significant legacy plastic that is still hitting our shores and in our environment. This is difficult, we know. I speak to you from Kenya, which is one of the more than 30 countries in Africa to have banned single-use plastic bags. This was brave back when it was done, but we know that going circular is complicated and challenging, and we know that poverty and access remain critical barriers to overcome. We need innovation from manufacturers, from importers, from exporters, and from governments to make this possible. If the global community can deliver, plastic pollution could fall by 80% by 2040, and that would dramatically reduce social, environmental, human health, and infrastructure costs, and cut greenhouse gas emissions, and create up to 700,000 jobs, mainly in the global south. We at UNEP are asking everyone to get involved in the just transition to a new plastics economy, which will improve livelihoods for millions of workers in the informal setting. Governments can deliver a strong deal to end plastic pollution. Businesses can show innovation and commitment to move away from virgin plastics, starting immediately. They don't have to wait for the deal to be finalized. The finance sector can put its capital behind this transformation. International financial institutions and other large investors need to move significant investments towards solid waste management and collection systems, which must include recycling and organics separation. Creative chemical engineers must take a hard look at product design and weed out harmful chemicals and plastics. And citizens can use their voices, their votes, and their wallets in this regard. Plastic can continue to bring huge benefits to humanity, but only if we completely rethink the systems to keep it circulating in the economy and out of the natural world. The science is clear. We must turn off the plastic tap on plastic pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anderson. And thanks to the colleagues who are already sending questions in. Please feel free to carry on then sending them in through that Q&A box. We'll immediately go into the presentation of the findings, which is going to be done by Ms. Sheila Agarwal Khan, who directs UNEP's Industry and Economy Division. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Keisha. I think the presentation will be put on for me shortly. Good, so thank you. So why did we decide on having a report on plastics at this point? Let me just first start by saying, there is, as you know, a global agreement under negotiation, but our analysis was to come more from a technical standpoint, to understand from UNEP's own analysis with partners what is needed to be able to stop plastic pollution. We worked with quite a few important players, University of Portsmouth, Systemic. We engaged with many different academic institutions, NGOs, other partners who are working in this space to understand what are the issues that they're facing and what are the potential solutions that are actually right now being tested by many different companies and by governments across the globe. And this analysis comes not necessarily, as part of the negotiation process, but as UNEP's input to be able to say, here is the possible changes that could happen to stop plastic pollution. Of course, at the end of the day, member states will take their own decisions, but here is a piece of work that has a solid technical analysis behind it. So right now, what do we have? We have a linear economy for plastics. You produce the plastics, they get used, the products get used, and then it normally becomes waste. And much of that waste is not even recyclable in today's economy. So while the plastics economy generates some 600 or 700 billion per year in income, at the end of the day, there are many costs that we're identifying. The environmental costs, the health costs, which as more research grows, shows bigger health implications. But of course, there's a lot of difference in values that we're seeing in the literature and on what has been found. We have taken a lower, more conservative estimate of the costs. That's why you see 300 to 600 billion. But we've seen literature showing up to 800 and sometimes even to, I think it was what, 1.5 trillion a year. But we used the more conservative estimates of the environment and human health costs from plastic pollution. Next slide. So what are we asking here for? We're talking about a systemic change, a systems change. That means that you cannot solve one part of the problem. You cannot simply say, well, let's just recycle our way out of the plastic pollution crisis. Or you cannot simply say, let's just simply do away with single-use plastics. No, there is a whole lot of changes from right upstream to midstream actors to downstream. It requires government engagement in terms of creating the enabling environment for different behaviors from industry to consumers to be able to change. And what does that system change look like? So on the first, we need to reduce the size of the problem, having less plastic that is actually going to end up as pollution. Then we see three different market shifts. One, reuse market. Instead of producing plastic that ends up in the waste stream, how do you create reuse and refill systems so that you're not constantly disposing of plastic, but reusing it and having it refilled, or having material that can be taken back to the producer to get fixed when it's broken, your phone, your laptop, so that they are constantly staying in the economy. Two, we need a market that allows things to be ideally mechanically recycled, because chemical recycling is still in its stages of research and needs some things to be addressed. So we're looking at how do you get more plastic that would end up in the waste stream to be recycled, meaning it has to be mechanically recycled, and only today 9% of the plastic produced can be mechanically recycled. So it has an upstream design issue to get more recycled. And two, to get that to recycling, it needs a better waste management infrastructure in countries, better sorting, collection systems, and of course, looking at how the waste pickers who are doing a lot of work in this space have their jobs protected, but in fact have better and more stable jobs. And then thirdly, the third market shift is looking at the kind of plastics that are entering the economy. Can we have alternatives that, based on a life cycle analysis, are safer than plastics, not creating any other environmental impact, and that do not produce the kind of pollution that we see? But lastly, even if you do all those market shifts, you still have the plastics that are sitting as pollution today in our water bodies, in the terrestrial ecosystems that we have. And so you have to deal with this legacy of plastic pollution that still exists. So if you were to shift to a circular economy, our analysis is showing that we could save globally some 4.5 trillion in costs by 2040, and at the same time improve the livelihoods and the jobs and create a net gain in jobs to millions of workers worldwide. So when we say 30% of plastics from short-lived products are avoidable and can be reduced, what do we mean by that? Well, on the one hand, we want to we're suggesting moving away from single-use plastics to plastics that stay in the economy. But even beyond that, what about the material that is there? You buy a lot of products today, you see there's a lot of headspace. So you need more packaging, but all you're transporting around the globe is air. You see a lot of products that have been diluted, detergents, shampoo, conditioner, liquefied, so they're diluted, and in what is being shipped around the globe is water, basically. So how do you get concentrates that can still be marketable, still earn revenue, but at the same time are using less plastic or less packaging to be able to reach the consumer. So this 30% is a mixture of things to be able to say how much can be reduced by the time we hit 2040. Slide. So as I had said, 3 market shifts: the reusable market, so that includes reuse, refill systems, take back systems, repair systems, so that at the end of the day, you're keeping things in the economy. The market for recycling, which is not just about waste management and infrastructure and recycling infrastructure, but about getting more plastics that would end up as waste, but that can be mechanically recycled. So if you want to, let's say, a viable recycling market, you have to look at upstream issues, and you have to look at the product that you're producing downstream, so that when you have post-consumer resin, that you have a market for it in the consumer goods that are produced. Ideally, a target required by governments that say products have to have X% of post-consumer resin in them would make for then a viable recycling business. And then, as I mentioned, alternatives, but not alternatives that create a bigger greenhouse gas footprint or a bigger land use footprint, but ones that are more sustainable and safer than the plastic packaging and other products that we have today. Thank you. Next slide. So a just transition. What do we mean by a just transition? Because at the end of the day, there are millions of workers who are paying a lot of time spending in collecting our waste, in getting it sorted and delivering it to recycling spaces or to the waste companies. And in discussions with the waste pickers, there is an interest in looking to seeing how do they protect, on the one hand, their jobs, but at the same time elevate their jobs so that they don't necessarily become simply employees of other companies, or even worse, not end up being outcompeted of jobs, but really transition to a space where either they're running their own companies or they have a guaranteed purchase of what they sort, but in a safer manner where they're not exposed to harmful substances as they go through the waste and get it sorted. And what is going to be needed to get this whole transition to is a more integrated approach, an integrated approach to the way regulation is done that looks at the various the parts of the system that need to change, from upstream issues, the market shifts, to the legacy plastic. It needs a set of enabling regulatory changes that have to happen for industry to get the right messages, for consumers to have the information in hand, whether it's through labeling on products or whatever, but that they can actually see what they're purchasing and take informed decisions. And then across the board for industry, across the full life cycle, whether it's upstream where plastics are produced, midstream to the consumer goods space, or downstream where you have waste management and recycling investments happening. So an integrated approach that looks at all of these. And at the end of the day, plastic pollution from our analysis is within reach. We see it as being able to create a net growth of jobs globally of 700,000 jobs. We see that in some spaces, while jobs may be lost, in other places, new jobs will come up and an increase in number of jobs globally. 2, we see industry being able to flourish in different spaces depending on how plastic is seen, whether it's more as a set of commodity that just ends up as waste, or whether it is able to transition more towards the service provider, and plastics are more like a plastic service that changes in the way it feeds the economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Ms. Agar Khan for that presentation of the findings. We'll go straight into the media Q&A. I will begin with a question that came just before this press conference started, and that is from Damien Carrington at The Guardian, who says, will the transformation set out in the report mean more or less profit and or revenue for the plastics industry overall? And I think this is one for you, Ms. Anderson.
there we go. I just need to unmute here. Well, thank you very much. So this is obviously not an economic assessment of profit and loss to the plastic industry. It doesn't seek to assess, this report doesn't seek to assess profits and impacts for the plastic industry. But what it does say is that the systems change that are outlined will mean that the production of virgin plastics would grow less, i.e. would shrink, but that if we get the circularity that as well as the reduction, as well as the alternatives that the report speaks to, in fact, that there is potential here. And the revenues and the profits from the plastic industry could still grow if they embrace a new and different way of working. For example, the virgin plastic pellets that are produced today will still be in production, but they will be having a much higher content of recycled content. And of course, we would need to also be clear about what kind of chemicals are in the mix, and these chemicals will need to be declared and taken out so that we can have an easier recycling. But truthfully, there are some real opportunities here. We heard Dr. Agrawal Khan just now speak to the opportunities for rethinking the very product that we are delivering. We are liquefying everything that doesn't need to be liquefied, and chemical industrial engineers need to rethink about the product, not only the packaging, but the actual product, so that it can be delivered in non-liquid form. And we're already seeing that happening, but I think we need to have companies lean in on this in this regard. The real cost savings that we are seeing is, of course, related to less production, but also to producing in a much more responsible way, thereby having all these externalities that today are not necessarily felt by the industry, but is felt by that tourism operator, is felt by that fishing vessel that has to sort out all the plastic, etc., that those externalities are not there hitting the economy in the broader sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anderson. So we'll move straight on to our second question, which is, I'm going to combine a batch of 3 questions which have been coming from Liang Lei at Ecobusiness, Benjamin Legendre at AFP, and David Renke at the German Press Agency, and they relate to the 80% figure. So how did the 80% reduction figure in plastic pollution come about? Benjamin asks, can you be precise about what it refers to which absolute figure is this percentage applied? And also, finally, the 3 market shifts added represent 87%. So what happens to the remaining 13%? David Renke also asked the same thing. I think I will ask Ms. Agrawal Khan and our colleague Yoransh Miller-Canals to respond. Thank you.
So thank you. So at the end of the day, the 3 market shifts are not going to solve the problem. They're going to solve a bulk of the problem, because they're going to say you have a different market to be able to either keep plastics in the economy or to recycle it safely and get it, off, let's say, the landfills or the dump sites, or to get it off getting into our water bodies. But it's not going to solve the full scale of the problem. And that's why we suggest 2 things. One is reduce the scale of the problem, the size of the problem. How do you get less plastics produced that are single use? I mean, what is it? I think it's 90% of the plastics that get used once in terms of packaging and get dumped in the ocean, or into end up actually in a dump site somewhere. The second issue is we have legacy plastics. Today, you walk anywhere, you go to the beach, you probably even just look in your backyard if you're digging up in your garden, and you'll find a small piece of plastic in there. So there is a lot of legacy plastic that is sitting in different parts of the environment, and that is degrading slowly into micro and nanoplastics. And that is what the level of plastic that researchers are finding in human bodies. So ultimately, between the air and water bodies, what food we ingest, what water we take in, it's coming into the human body. And so the 80% that is solvable through the market shifts doesn't deal with these kind of issues, which are where the plastics are still staying in the environment.
Your answer, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so just to complement, so also going into the specifics of how this 80% has been calculated. The 80% refers to the saving of plastic pollution that will not be generated by 2040 if we take all of these solutions that we're discussing. So we estimate, we model, or we have the knowledge of today's amount of plastic pollution, around over 100 million tons of million metric tons of plastic. And that includes plastic that is already in the environment, but also plastic that is being mismanaged. That amount will more than double by 2040 if we do nothing. And if we apply all the solutions that we're proposing here, that would be 80% less. So we would get to around 40 million tons of plastic pollution by 2040. And yeah, I mean, just also, I mean, complementing on what Sheila was saying, we have already, I mean, this legacy of plastic pollution exists in the environment, but it's also in the economy. So we have a lot of plastic that has been designed not to be circulated back. And that plastic will become waste in the coming decades. So we will still have to manage that plastic. The 13% that you're missing in your additions is the amount that we think by 2040 we will still need to be disposing of in a linear way, but disposing safely so it doesn't become pollution. I hope that clarifies. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next question, which is from James Bruggers at Inside Climate News. And it says, what role at this point do you see chemical recycling playing in any environmental agreement to control plastic waste, and why? Do you see chemical recycling as a circular plastic option? I think that is going to be for Ms. Anderson, and perhaps Ms. Agarwal can complement.
Well, I mean, obviously, we want to talk about recycling, and mechanical, as you heard from Dr. Agarwal Khan, is clearly the priority because there is a huge carbon footprint on chemical recycling. And a good number of the chemical recycling today actually doesn't recycle. It becomes de facto making it into very dirty fuels that can be burned off. And that is obviously not the way we want to go with climate change, nor with pollution. There is also a justice dimension that we need to be aware of. Many of these chemical recycling factories and places are actually on we see a degree of environmental, where they are placed, have environmental effects on the poorest and those who have the least voice in society. Now, notwithstanding that, we are aware, of course, that you can only mechanically recycle 7-8 times, and thereafter you do need to think about how you will recycle. But we need to then be sure that kind of energy that we're using, the kind of chemicals that we're using, that we're very, very careful about that footprint. So it is not the panacea, and we need to be careful about touting that as the sole solution. It will be presumably part of the mix, but with a number of guardrails around it, which we need to be very mindful of from an environmental point of view and from an environmental justice point of view. Thank you.
Dr. Agarwal Khan, would you like to supplement?
Yeah, I would maybe just add, in addition to the carbon footprint and a potential pollution footprint, depending on the kind of additives that might have been used in the plastics that reach the chemical recycling facility. Another big issue to consider is the cost. So in our engagement with a lot of different actors who have been interested in the space, they're worried about whether the cost will be manageable enough to be able to generate enough of a revenue. So of course, you need to then have a large volume of plastics to be able to have a profitable business. And because the cost seems quite high, I think still the industry is saying to us that they need to still do a lot more research to address all the issues of cost, carbon footprint, and the potential pollution risk that could come from that. So until that research is done and the industry has innovated further, there's a bit of a challenge there on the chemical recycling side.
Thank you very much. We will move on to our next question, which comes from David Renke at the German press agency. And it says, in your report, you estimate that up to $143 billion, in cost for marine ecosystem services due to damage by plastic pollution. Can you give some examples of how plastic pollution is affecting these services? I think that we'll ask Mr. Stephen Stone to come in to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Keisha. So I want to say first off that the 143 billion is actually the upper bound estimate. If you look at the report, you'll see there's also a lower bound estimate of 70 billion per year, and that's the one we use in the report to calculate our figures. There's a range because in the literature, you get a wide range of estimates, and typically what we've done, as Sheila said, is we go for the lower bound estimate. I wanted to mention what's inside of that. Well, there's impacts on coastal tourism, particularly foregone revenues that are lost because of plastic pollution. There are impacts on the fisheries themselves because of sea gear, ghost gear, and vessels that need to be repaired because of the plastic pollution. There's also productivity losses to the ecosystems themselves. So there's a wide range of impacts on the marine ecosystems that are generated by plastic pollution and are causing these economic losses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stone. We'll move on to our next question, which comes from Steve Tollekin, Plastics News, who asks, to achieve the goals in this report, can you speak to the key challenges to overcome or the top priorities in the upcoming Paris round of talks to move the treaty discussions forward? I think I'll give this to you, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you. Of course, the talks will be determined by those who talk, i.e. the negotiators, and not by UNEP. But what I can say is clearly that what we are finding within these talks is that, frankly, everyone is coming to the table seized with finding a solution. There is a tremendous amount of goodwill on the side of every single country that is turning up to these talks. There may be different on-ramps to the solutions, and I'll get to them in a moment, but it is important to say that every country that suffers from plastic pollution, every voter, every community, we just heard from my colleague Stephen Stone, every fishing community, every tourism operator, every infrastructure operator for hydropower, etc., is aware of this problem and therefore wants to find a solution. There is a massive push by electorate and by community groups to find solutions. And on the whole, we're finding that business is trying to grapple with this in the best way. So what then is it? I think the solutions will vary depending on where we are. We speak to you from Kenya. Kenya is a lower middle income country, and we are surrounded by other countries that are poorer than Kenya. And here the affordability, the ability to afford things means that you can't buy in bulk. So you're going to buy in smaller sachets. Often they will be double lined with metal as well as plastic. Very difficult, if not impossible, to recycle. There's poor collection in many countries in the global south, which is why I called in my statement on massive investment by IFIs on the infrastructure, solid waste management infrastructure, collection systems, etc. There's the inability to pay by the poorest for that collection, or the unwillingness, depending on which strata of society, it's easier to dump, which means that countries need to grapple with cross subsidies, etc., finding a way that they can subsidize collection from an other revenue where people have willingness to pay. In some countries, it's not allowed. In other countries, this is doable. But all round, we need to look at the segmentation of the solutions. But the bottom line is that we have seen a willingness here to step in. Then, of course, there is the issue of, well, as long as virgin plastic is cheaper than recycled, then that becomes an economic dimension that will make us, as a global society, lean back on virgin. So how to make that happen? Well, the report mentions that in some markets, a levy might very well be a possibility. In other markets, probably not. The report speaks to extended producer responsibility. We're already seeing that. I speak to you from a country that has rolled out EPR. It's difficult to actually make it work, but many countries are grappling with it. And of course, we know that in countries where you have very high recycling, it is because there's a take-back system, there's a deposit system, so there are incentives. It's looking at all of these, and one size does not fit all, because there are different markets, there are different economic levels of ability to address this. But what is clear is we need to reduce these 3 gear shifts that the report, we need to redesign and rethink the systems, and we need to obviously step up recycling, but also the redesign becomes absolutely critical. These are the elements. And then we need to take on, and this will be my last point, as Sheila said, the legacy plastic. If I am from a Pacific Island country and my primary revenue is tourism, but I have to think 20, 30 years into the future where I'm going to be paying to clean the beaches from legacy plastic arriving on my beaches from elsewhere. These are the kind of issues where we have to have a global conversation about who will pick up the tab for that bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anderson. We have just a few questions left, and also we're running out of time, so we'll take a couple more. We have one directed to Ms. Anderson, but perhaps you might have some additions, Ms. Agrawal Khan, and your answer. So it is, do you see the recycling industry competing with the virgin plastic industry on a market basis alone? Or do you think that regulations, tax levies, or state subsidies are necessary for the recycled industry to compete?
Sorry, I wasn't sure who it was for, but I'll start, and I'm sure that Dr. Agrawal Khan will follow through. And clearly, I mean, look, let's face it, where we have seen in localities where recycling is very high, why is that? Well, to a large extent, because instruments such as bans or incentives, depending, have been legislated or regulated for. So clearly, we see that that works. And we also see in places where there is zero legislation, either on the packaging side or on the collection and recycling side, that you have much more plastic waste in the open environment. So I think it's fairly obvious that when you put down some degree of regulation, some degree of EPR, some degree of deposit return, some degree of refill, this is what will enable it. If we do it all from bottom up, I don't know that we will get the kind of solution that the world is expecting, that the next generation wants, that everybody who's a tourism operator or a fishing community needs to see to sustain their income. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Would anyone go ahead, Ms. Agrawal Khan?
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, I mean, if you look at the mechanically recycled plastics, only what 9% of what plastics we produce can be mechanically recycled. So at this point, you can't really say that there's a competition because it's for such a small percentage of plastics produced. Now, if you were to say you have many more plastics produced that can be mechanically recycled, well, is it competition or is it actually an opportunity to think differently about one's business? So I think it depends on the perspective of those business owners who would see whether this is an opportunity to be part of the solution and to say that the petrochemicals are actually embracing having post-consumer resin as a part of the plastics production that they would entail. And we've heard from some of them that's quite doable. And on the other hand, their own investment in recycling, for which we're hearing is possible, but maybe not yet, it's not yet happened at the scale that it would need to. But as Ms. Anderson says, one of the key issues is not just looking at the recycling set, because that's not going to solve the problem. At the end of the day, it's the whole change across the entire life cycle of plastics that's going to be key.
Thank you very much, Dr. Agrawal Khan. We have one question coming in from Kenya, from the Tuko Media, which is for Ms. Anderson. It says, you said Kenya banned the use of plastic bags, but there is evidence that they are secretly sold in some areas. Is there any cooperation between the UN Environment Programme and the government to track down the underhand dealers?
Well, first of all, let me say that unfortunately, we are seeing illegal activity across many countries when such bans go down. I will also hasten to add that the Kenyan NEMA, the National Environmental Management Agencies, have been going after some of this illegal trade and illegal production. And you will see that they are very much aware of this and seeking to enforce the prevailing laws. Single-use plastics is, and I was just in South Africa where we were discussing some of these issues. Look, the issue, and I think Dr. Agrawal Khan spoke to this, how do you ensure that in a country with high unemployment, some of these small industries do not are getting through in a just transition? And this is part of the broader conversation that countries have to seek to find solutions to. And we from UNEP will obviously continue to engage with all member states in this regard. We very much urge countries to look at the kind of encouragement that they can do on circularity. And there are a number of companies here in Kenya that precisely are doing this, having waste pickers who have a guaranteed income stream for the waste that they collect, having recycling at source, taking the organics out from the waste so that it is easier to recycle. We know that when you mix organic plastic and metal, it becomes frankly a total catastrophe and not decent work for anyone to have to sort through. So finding some of these solutions. The thing that all countries will need to deal with is how to make this, incentivize this so that indeed these things can be taken up at the state, county and municipal levels in all countries.
Thank you very much. I think we'll take one final question, which is from Inside Climate News. It says, new research out of the UK shows that mechanical recycling may be producing very large quantities of microplastics, perhaps as much as 13% of incoming waste to a mechanical recycling facility. Given the health and environmental concerns about microplastics, could increasing mechanical recycling actually create a new environmental problem? I think, Mr. Yorans Canals, I'll ask you to handle that.
Excellent, thanks. Certainly, I think it's been already said, mechanical recycling is probably the best that we have, even if it's not perfect. We can certainly improve the technology on mechanical recycling, and importantly, by improving the design of plastic products and improving what goes into the products in the first place, that can also help increase the efficiency of mechanical recycling and other types of recycling as well. So it's important, and I think that's also quite stressed in the report. We need the standards on which type of products, which type of polymers, which chemicals as well go into these polymers, and also standards for waste management technologies, including on recycling. And on that, we can improve. But the option of, well, this is substandard, we cannot use it. We cannot use mechanical recycling as a solution. That certainly would generate more problems than the solutions. So I hope that clarifies a bit.
Thank you very much. Ms. Anderson, would you like to add something?
Just on the issue of microplastics, and since many of our journalists may be from the global north, to have a clear understanding that other microplastics are much more frequent in the environment, and those are from textiles, poly-based fibers. Those are from tires of vehicles, which have a large percentage of plastic content, and those are from road markings. So that we need to find solutions. We need road markings, we need tires on our cars, and we need to wash our clothes, and we're probably not going to go away from technical clothing. So the point here is to be mindful of where these challenges are, including in the mechanical recycling space, and then think about innovations around this so that we can minimize the kind of micro and nanoplastics that end up in the open environment. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Keisha.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our press conference. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our panelists for their expertise and their knowledge, and to our media colleagues who I know, it's a hugely busy media agenda. So we're grateful that you made the time to join us for this. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. And feel free to write to us if you need any questions answered. Thank you all. Bye-bye.